Would the videos be causing a buffering issue on her end?
No, we're fine. Just go ahead and start, Jacqueline.
Yeah, it's frozen on my end. It's not loading me.
Okay. I'll go ahead and do the intro real quick.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to the FMCC webinar, Back to School, How Academic Design Trends Are Reshaping the Workplace. We have Lisa Killaby, Jeffrey Tu, and Kay Sargent. Next slide, please. I do want to let everyone know they have been muted for audio quality. If you do have any questions during the webinar, please feel free and type them into the chat box, and we'll review them during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. Next slide, please. And as always, we do want to let you know that the FMCC provides many services to the FM community, such as Ask the Expert, Find a Consultant, Locate a Speaker, and also other online educational resources at fmcc.ifma.org. Next slide, please. And Jacqueline Lee is the moderator of the webinar today. And next slide, please. And we also like to take the time to thank our sponsors of the FMCC. And the next slide. Great. And the next slide. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the current past president of the FMCC, John Ringness.
Great. Thank you very much, Josh. Hello, everyone. And on behalf of the FMCC board, we'd like to welcome you to another edition of our Consultants Council ongoing webinar series. We especially wish to welcome the workplace evolutionaries today who are joining us. It looks like we are in for an excellent and informative webinar. Our first presenter is Lisa Killaby. Lisa has 30 years of design focusing on strategic elements of design. Our next slide. Then we have Kay Sargent, who has also been 30 years as a design and a teacher, although you don't look like you've been in it for that long. But with 5 children, three in university. Crazy. And next we have Greg Tu. Thank you. And he's associate professor at Virginia Tech with 23 years of teaching and administrative experience. So without further ado, we'll turn it over to our first presenter.
Thank you, John.
Okay.
We are going to talk today about the convergence of academic and workplace and how we are starting to see these spaces look and feel and act more like the same. And for the attendees calling in today, we're going to run a quick survey. We're not going to do it online. So if you have a piece of paper handy, just jot down the number 1 through 9. And we're going to quickly go through some images here and ask whether you believe this is an image of a corporate setting or of an academic setting. And at the end, Kay will let you know whether you've gotten the correct answers or not. So this is number 1. Is this a school or corporation? I'll give you just a couple seconds to look at it. This is number 2. Is this a school or is this a corporate setting? Number 3. Does this look like where you went to school or where you might be working today? Number 4. Same question. And number 5. Is this academic or corporate workplace? Number 6. Number 7. Number 8. School or corporate. And number 9. What does this look like to you? I'm going to turn it over to my co-presenter here today, Kay, to talk a little bit more about what's impacting education.
Thanks, Lisa. So first of all, none of those look like where I went to school, but I went to school 30 years ago, and what we know is that education is changing significantly over the last 10 years, but really going forward as well. Lisa, can you advance?
Sure.
Thanks. Technology is having a huge impact on the workplace today and on how we're educating our students. In fact, in a recent poll, it said that over 90% of students use emails to communicate with their professors. Can you advance? The other interesting fact is that 70% of children between the age of 2 and 5 can use a computer mouse, but only 11% of them can tie their own shoes. So we really kind of are moving over to a world that's more focused on technology. And I love this cartoon of this, where the little girl, the dad asks about how his daughter's day in school went, and she basically says, read about it in my blog, which quite frankly is the way I found out the majority of things that are happening in my kids' life today. It's all through technology, and that's how they're communicating. 73% of students say that they cannot study without technology. Stanford University back in 2009, decided that they wanted to put a class online for the first time, and it was one of their most popular classes, and they decided they were going to do an experiment and do it for free. Within a week, close to 100,000 students were enrolled in those courses, and it really became the first mass online course. And the professor that had been giving the course for over multiple years basically said that he usually reached about 40 students a year. And so he literally could instantly create a platform where he could reach a significant number of students. You can go to the next slide. But the problem was that he had a poor completion rate. Literally only about 7% of those students actually completed the course. And a lot of people said that those courses tended to be very boring, very dry, sometimes a little bit out of date. They didn't have that interaction with the professor and or the other students. And so that the online learning needed to really find a way to be more engaging. Now, MOOCs have started a lot of conversations and topics about, are we going to continue to put that out there? Are we giving classes out for free? And if that happens, are we going to negate the ability to have a physical campus? But the interesting thing is that almost the exact opposite has happened. That what these MOOCs started to do was to start to introduce some of these classes to a greater audience that then realized that this is something that I want to pursue, and then often they long to have that interconnection with their students. The other interesting thing is that a lot of these universities that started purely online, like University of Phoenix, what they're finding is that students yearn to really connect with each other, and so they've actually, even though they started virtually, have started to create physical locations where students can come together. Even if their classrooms are virtual, they have campus hubs and areas where they can study together, maybe meet with professors, etc. So MOOCs did not negate the ability to have physical campuses. It actually enhanced it and supported it. Next slide, please. Today, the students that we're educating are radically different from the students that our education system was designed to teach. When we first designed our education system, it was really geared around having students that were in a manufacturing mentality, right? Where students they reported to a class in the morning. You think about kindergarten, right? You all show up, you sit in your desk, and you do exactly what the teacher says. Then you go into elementary school, you get a little bit more freedom, but you still kind of have a class that's somewhat controlled. Then you get to junior high and high school where you have more freedom, right? You have a bell, you have a class, and you go to the next class. And then in college, you have the ultimate freedom. You can decide what your schedule is, what your classes are, etc. And then you graduate from college, you enter the workforce, and you're back in kindergarten all over again, right? Where you have to report at a certain time, you have to be there at a certain time, and it's a very set expectation. But we're dealing with a very, very different mentality today and a very different generation. And so we have the rise of the millennial workers that are in the workforce. And the interesting thing is, if you look to the far right of this, the Gen 2020 or the Gen Zs, as many people are calling them, they are about to come into the workforce in about 5 years, which means that they're really in college right now and who we're really focused on. Next slide, please. So when we start to look at the attributes of the traditional, the boomers, the Gen Xers, and the millennials, they are almost polar opposite in a lot of regards as far as aesthetics, as far as ergonomics, as far as their desire for the corner office, as far as their ability to handle noise, dress codes, amenities. But we're also finding that there's some similarities as well throughout the generations. But we are dealing with a group that has been multimodal the majority of their life. And this is a generation that has always kind of dealt with stimulation coming from multiple different locations. So it's a very different experience when we set up for learning environments today. Next slide, please. There's been all kinds of stuff written about the next generation and the millennials, right? And a lot of it is about how they're very, very focused on themselves. Next slide. But I'm going to argue that progress is not made by a generation that tends to have low expectations. Progress is made by a generation that has high expectations. So this was a billboard that actually was put outside in New York City: overeducated, underemployed, and wildly optimistic, which is, we want our youth to be wildly optimistic. Next slide, please, Lisa. So there's certain attributes that the future students are starting to bring. Number one, they're always connected. And Lisa, you can probably click through because there's going to be a whole lot of stuff on this slide. They're always connected. They tend to be very dynamic learners, very hands-on, very dynamic. They learn from lots of different ways. They tend to be very visual learners. They can get almost everything online. If you go back to that statistic of the 73% cannot study without technology. They have immediate access to the media, good and bad. And they're really kind of in a weevolution, right? They tend to do everything in packs. They like to be, instantly connected to other people, and they have the ability to do that today. They have full access to information, people in other countries, other cultures, and they really have a much more global perspective because they can access that and connect to it very easily. They tend to use technology to express their creativity. And as Time magazine said, they tend to be me, right? They tend to be this broadcast yourself. They can put themselves out there, the selfie generation, the YouTube generation, the put everything online generation. But that also means that they're very multimodal. They can multitask, they can go between different modes of communications and have lots of different stimuli coming from different areas. Next slide, please. So the archetypes talks about how there is generational traits, and you can never never have a high without a low, you never have good without evil, etc. And so they talk about there's a 75-year turn, and that the generations kind of evolve in 4 cycles. First, you kind of have a hero generation that's brought together by crisis, and that crisis really kind of makes everybody bond together, and they have a united force, and they go forward. The next generation, their children, the one that follows, tends to be more of an artist type of a generation, right? They've reached this high period, now they want to revel in that, and they really want to have kind of this renaissance. The generation following tends to be the prophets, the ones that question everything, right? They're 2 generations removed from the heroes, and so now it's, well, why are we doing this, and how did we get there, et cetera. And they tend to be very inquisitive and questioning, and maybe have a little bit of an unraveling in the sense of some of the things that the hero generation brought about. And then you have the nomads. And the nomads really are kind of the generation that tends to be a little bit more in crisis. They're not necessarily sure what brings them all together. And from that crisis, then you have the rise of the hero generation. Now, if we play this out throughout history, and we can show how this goes for the last 200 years, the last great hero generation was the Great Generation, the World War II generation. The artist generation was the silent generation, the one that followed. The prophets then were the baby boomers. So think about the 60s when we questioned everything, women's rights and civil rights, and all of those different things kind of came to a head. And then, of course, you have Gen Xers that were the nomads and kind of the latchkey kids. And if you follow this, it shows that right now we're kind of in a period of crisis. And all you got to do to look at that is turn on the television, and you can see that really we're a very divided culturally and as a country and really as a global community. There's very little that people can get behind. There's a lot that's dividing us. And so that means that the next generation of the millennials is scheduled to be the hero generation. Now, a lot of people say, you got to be kidding me. They're high demanding. They want everything right away. It's instant gratification. But again, progress is made by people that have high expectations. And so if you play that out, the millennials will be that hero generation. And the generation that follows them will then be the artists and the makers, which if you look at the onshoring of manufacturing, 3D printing, really bows into that. So these are the generations that we're focused on educating and welcoming into the workplace. High expectations, very hands-on, multimodal. So we should go to the next slide, please. But we also have several other things from a demographic standpoint that are really impacting it. We have fewer men that are going to college right after high school now. In fact, we have fewer men that are going to college, period, whatsoever. And for the first time, the number of females entering college far exceeds the number of men. That also means that in the future, we're going to have more women entering into the workforce as well at a higher rate than we have men. Next slide, please. In 2012, the National Center for Education revealed that for the first time in 3 decades, we have a diminishing number of students that are going into colleges. And that was really staggering because probably in about 2010 was the height of applicants for college. But now all of a sudden it's starting to revert. And as our population of younger kids is starting to diminish as well, we're starting to look at the first time of colleges not necessarily being the hunted, but being the hunters. They're going to have to reposition themselves to really attract those students because we're starting to look at a plateau or a peak, and now plateauing from the number of students that we foresee going into colleges. You can go to the next slide. Only 31% of students at public colleges got their bachelor's degree within 4 years. Okay, so that's horrible news for somebody like me that has 3 kids in college right now. But this is becoming the average, right? The average student now is taking 68 months to earn a 4-year degree, which means that people are staying in colleges longer. But we also have the effect of professionals having to go back into college more. So now some of these students that are coming out, 60 to 70% of the colleges today are dependent on student loans for their income. And that's a huge shift from what it was originally. And students have an unprecedented level of debt when they're coming out of college. And so many are predicting, Lisa, if you go to the next slide, that we're going to have a huge financial crisis. Because just as we had the housing bubble, if students start to renege on those student loans, but the colleges are dependent on the income from those to really supplement the colleges and to really keep them operational, we're going to have a huge crisis on our hand if we don't get that college debt under control. And it could have an even worse impact about the number of students that are actually going into college today. So we're starting to look at a little bit more of a shift, that it may not be kids coming right out of high school or college. It might also be people that are going back to get retrained. And colleges might have to think who really their future students are going to be. So Lisa, I'm going to turn it back over to you to talk a little bit about the evolution of work and how that's happening today.
Thanks, Kay. So as Kay talked about, we have online learning, we have this next generation coming along, we have this level of debt. How is that going to affect how higher education functions and eventually looks? So as we look at the new normal in classrooms, 49% of business leaders believe that educational facilities are only doing a fair to a poor job of educating students for the business world. So what's going on there? What is causing that? Fast Company did some predictions about the future of higher education, about what and where and how people will learn. And they included that the curricula needs to become more multidisciplinary, and the buildings will need to reflect that. Educational leaders, like we're going to talk to Greg in a little bit, need to be able to balance that online learning with traditional learning. So how do they do that, and how does academia support that, both physically as well as structurally within the systems? Fewer students out there. Higher ed will need to hunt, just like you may be trying to do that in the workforce right now. The higher ed leaders will need to be really hunters, and they will need to think about recruitment and retention, terms that we've always associated with the corporate business world, along with well-being. Students are expecting that. The schools will need to invest in technology, infrastructure, and given what's going on in the world, security. Higher ed will need to look at new funding models as debt loan numbers start to increase. So Kay and I took this information from all of these various sources and started to say, so what will future learning environment start to look like? Buildings will need to be more flexible. They'll need to be able to accommodate different styles of learning and needs, technology for online learning, more traditional or classroom for live learning. That space needs to be able to be agile and to be able to morph. There needs to be more space allocated to communal areas, social areas, interactive areas. Teaching will be how to team, collaboration. Again, those communal spaces will be important. It needs to be comfortable and easy for everybody to use. The professors will become more like facilitators. So more interactive spaces, few sort of lecture halls or stages are required. Security is an issue. Areas of refuge will be important. Technology will be enhanced, but it shouldn't be reliant, more hands-on. The ability for the classroom to be reached globally will be important. Real-world settings will be important for students as they transition from academia to the workplace. So we really started to think about the classroom as flipped. It's a little bit backwards from what you would think about in the past. So, for instance, this is not one of the images we showed you up front, but looks like a typical corporate setting. It's not. It's in academia. It's actually at a UMass campus here in the greater Boston area. But the students are working in a collaborative manner. The professor's in the middle of the group. He's not standing in front of them. They're using technology. They're using whiteboards to be much more interactive, more of a team-building collaborative situation. So 63% of leaders think that we will need to add these small meeting rooms centered around workplace to be most conducive to preparing students for what they'll face in the real world. We will be adding real workspace with learning spaces and combining them together. The spaces need to be collaborative. They need both in the workspace for the students as well as in their social spaces here. And bringing those together. This is actually a project we did for a design university here in the Boston area, and each floor either has a digital learning or interactive space, such as this is shown, or they have the more traditional sort of workspace with a concrete floor and a slop sink for their less digital art, and they're what we call the messy art floors.
Lisa, is that a pink pool table in front?
It is.
I like it.
And the kitchen area, everything is linked together, and there's actually a social zone put around the washer and dryer machines through the laundry area, so everything is transparent throughout this entire space. Mm-hmm. Technology, needing it really, everybody will have their own laptops, there'll be monitors installed, everything needs to be easy to use. You see the remote learning here for an off-site continual, ability for people to call in and tie into the spaces that way. The furniture and the spaces need to be flexible. They need to be social. I wish we had done this space. I love this picture. We did not do this space. And they need to be fluid. So I'm going to give you one quick example of a project that we did at MIT a few years ago now. And this is academic, administrative, and student spaces. As we talked about, the smaller work areas for students, the ability to use them in a very creative, energetic way, writing on the glass. Instead of all of the academic folks being in individual offices, they have team rooms. Versus the original program came in that everybody should receive their own office, and as we talked to them about how they work and how they could work better, we ended up creating team rooms, and they were much more effective. Large work areas, breakout areas. This is a maker space that the students are able to come in and use, as well as you see on the right, there's touchdown spaces throughout. This is actually a joint venture between MIT and a university overseas. So at some point during the school year, they'll have an extra 60 students and professors that are here from the other university. So the ability to really have them be able to touch down almost anywhere was very important. So what really is the future of learning? Kay, do you want to do this or you want me to?
I'll do it, sure.
Okay.
You just got to advance for me, okay?
Yep.
All right, so it was teacher-focused. Now it's really about students. It was about mass-produced education. Now it's about mass customization of education. It used to be very lecture-based. Now it's more hands-on, project-based. It used to be about learning in the classroom. Now it's 24/7, in and out of the classroom, learn anytime, anywhere. It used to be about the teacher or the sage on the stage. Now it's kind of the facilitator or the guide on the side. It used to be about content focused, and now it's learning to learn, right? It's about making sure that students are prepared when they come out for a continual lifelong learning. It used to be about not necessarily technology focused, and now it's very technology rich. It was more about controlled learning, and this is what we need you to get out of this class and what we need you to think. And now it's more about preparing students to think critically on their own, to adapt and to adjust. It used to be that they were lectured to. Now it's more about being communicated with. It used to be about memorizing certain text or data or stats, but now we can get that from the computer. So it's more about critical thinking and application of that knowledge. It used to be more theoretical. Now it tends to be more tactical. How do we act that? How do we apply that? What does that mean and where do we use that? So when we start looking at the corporate environments that we're dealing today, they also have changed significantly from kind of the rows of workstations or cubicles that we once experienced. Today we're experiencing a whole new set of corporate trends. Lisa, can you advance? Thanks. It's more about the entrepreneurial spirit. It's about having social media madness kind of that's impacting our offices today. It's about continual education throughout one's life. It's about having technology, rules, kind of as an enabler. And this is one of the things I think that we're really struggling with in work today is technology running us or are we running technology? And it's really about making sure that it's an enabler. It's about having agile, flexible workspaces. It's about creating collaborative spaces, but there's a huge focus right now on the fact that we've kind of over-talked about collaboration, and we need to make sure that we're balancing that with focused, heads down, concentrated space so that people can be thoughtful, mindful, and really come up with good, solid work. It's also about being socially responsible. And of course, gamification has come into the workplace as well. Right? It's that thought of how do you take a generation that's grown up their entire life by playing games and instantly rewarded and make sure that they feel fulfilled in the workplace and or beyond. And when I first saw this, I thought, you know, this is so ridiculous. But then I started thinking about Starbucks rewards and Marriott points, etc. And there's really nothing wrong with rewarding people for doing a good job. So it's about how do we break down tasks and make people feel like they have a meaningful impact and reward and recognition for what they're doing. And then, of course, engagement is a huge topic in corporate trends right now as well. We have 70% of the corporate workplace is workers are totally disengaged with their working. They don't necessarily feel like they're working for a bigger purpose, right? But there are a whole lot of people that are showing up today, and it's kind of this presenteeism. I'm here, but I'm not really all in. I'm not really giving it my all. And so that's a huge challenge today, and one that most corporations are trying to come to grips with of how do we engage and empower our workers. And that also bodes for well-being. This concept of we focus so much on the sustainability of our buildings that we forgot that sitting stagnantly in some of these offices are killing us. And so we really need to find a way to get people active, engaged, and empowered, because those are how we really improve productivity and have people have more sense of community and belonging. So let's go to the next slide. And I think we're going to have Greg talk a little bit about some of the student expectations. So Greg, you sit with students every single day, and you talk to your students as they graduate and they're going out into the workplace, and you know, they come back to you and they tell you these horror stories or they reveal these great stories. So can you share a little bit about student expectations and what this generation is looking for when they go out to the workplace?
Right. So I think the first thing to keep in mind is that at least at a big university like Virginia Tech, we've got a very diverse student population. I'm teaching a class right now and have for the last 5 years that has 330 students in it. So the Sage on the Stage is that format. And I asked them a question using the internet between the last class and the one that I'll be giving here in a couple of hours to talk about where they're from. And we had everything from a student that used to ride her horse every morning in the Mongolian outback to a kid that grew up in or is from Abu Dhabi, pretty much every state in the United States and various other places around the world. So, that by itself, presents some, interesting challenges and interesting opportunities. Then on the other end of the spectrum, I teach Design Studio. I'm an architecture and interior design professor where we spend 12 hours a week with 20 students. So, you've got that opposite ends of the spectrum. So, there are really all sorts of things going on in all sorts of different learning environments within the university. One of the things that I think is interesting about the data that we've had presented here today is that the number of students in university has peaked, which seems to be in direct contrast with everybody trying to grow. Here at Virginia Tech, we hired a new university president a year ago, and he has said that we're looking to grow by 5,000 students, and we have the biggest freshman entering class that we've had this year from our history. And I was on the phone with an administrator at another university, large state university in our region last week, and they have a new president that said that they're looking to grow from 30,000 to 40,000 students. So what we're seeing here is that the university is somewhat desperately trying to upgrade all of its facilities in this competition for students. So there's this annual ranking of the best food service in the nation. Well, we win that, it seems like, every year. Just read an article where Radford University was in the news today because they've just spent something like $70 million updating their dormitory. So they all have private bathrooms and, the kinds of things that, might be what students are expecting based on the kind of homes that they grew up in, unlike the dormitories that we probably all experience with the common bathrooms and concrete blocks that, were just the step above camping, essentially. So now everyone is competing to elevate the quality of the environment as a sales tool to attract the students. So I did a survey of the students, and I've taught a couple of thousand students in this large format lecture course, Design Appreciation, over the last 5 years. And somewhat predictably, the answers about what kind of environments they might expect in the workplace the answers were all over the map. If they were design students, they might have a bit more sensitivity to having a good work environment. But at a certain level, a lot of the students, I think, are really, kind of in that frame of mind where they're looking for the most interesting opportunity, and there's still that sort of innovation in the, parents' garage kind of mentality that some of them are maybe looking more for career opportunity rather than amenities that might be offered in a particular workplace. But I think as the quality of the environment is sort of ratcheted up each year in universities around the country, that the expectations for the sort of work environment as students will continue to rise. We have a bunch of quotes here, but it gets a little tedious trying to read those. One thing that was interesting was some of the students were so excited about their workplaces, they sent some photos. So these are some of the photos that they sent into my question. And these happened to be really nice, but then there were some others that were just awful, but they were still really excited about their job. And it hadn't crossed their mind that was even something to be concerned with, that they were excited to be able to use their education in a professional sort of work.
Yeah, Greg, you and I talked earlier about how some of these guys are just so thankful to have a job, they don't care where they're working. But when it's, when some of these students have a choice, and they might have a few different job offers, then all of a sudden things like the workplace and what it looks like is a reflection of the culture, and that starts having a bigger impact.
I did the survey last year, and by then the sort of desperation from the 2008-2009 economic sort of collapse, slowdown, had been replaced. The students don't have any sort of connection to, it's like, what difference does it make to them if the economy is collapsing as long as their parents didn't lose their job when they were in middle school or high school, right? So, I mean, they cycle through pretty quickly. So they didn't have that baggage of worrying about just finding a job that, when we did that survey, they were still sort of expecting to get a job without much difficulty when they got out. So, so again, it really was all over the map in terms of that expectation. But as I said, I think it will start to become more and more of an issue as, our quality standards, go up. I happened to teach this big lecture class in a pretty dreadful room. It was interesting, about 3 years ago, they paid to put an electrical outlet under every single chair so people could plug in their laptops, and a lot of faculty, and myself included in this course, do not allow them to use laptops, simply because they end up very quickly sort of getting distracted by something that pops up, and then they're off to doing something else on the computer that then draws the attention of everybody sitting around them in a steeply raked auditorium. So we're all still struggling to figure out how to make all of this work here.
Yeah, and I don't think that's any different in the corporate world either. You can you can go to any meeting, right? And there's always a group of people that might be distracted by their technology, et cetera. So I think the entire world is trying to figure out, how do we balance, everything positive that technology brings with the underbelly that it can distract us, it can, take your focus someplace else, et cetera. And I think we need to come up with some IT etiquette, because it just seems to be a big issue right now. About
the laptops, it really wasn't my decision. I really don't care. I can, the first year that I taught the class, I was talking to 300 Apple logos, with all of their faces kind of illuminated glow, and I started looking for ways to sort of encourage them not to use them, simply because the students would write in on the course evaluations at the end of the class that the computers were distracting. And so this year, for the first time, I just flat out said, let's put the laptops away. We're not going to use them. And I've required them to keep a sketchbook to take their notes in and to record their thoughts about the class. And surprisingly, that's something that they embraced pretty nicely in ways that I didn't expect.
Good.
That's great. And Greg, I love this last one. The obviously somebody with a degree in sciences talks quite prolifically about the fact that it's about the instruments and the things that they get to use in the labs when they get out in the work world. But then his second comment, he or she's second comment, is about the access to light. It was nice that it was sort of this contrast. They're really, really interested in making sure that they have the right tools to do their work, but then the next most important thing to them seems to be that ability to be able to see daylight.
Right.
Just very, very nice.
If you go around our campus, there are absolutely beautiful modern facilities like in this photo, and then stuff that kind of is dungeony, that hasn't been updated since the 1930s probably.
Yeah.
So immersive workspaces are really blending environments that are replacing the sort of traditional archaic workplaces with a more vibrant working, learning environment. So we're going to run you through one last project example of a client who, sort of an odd space. They leased space above retail. So this is second floor of a two-story building, and really wanted to make it feel as open and as collaborative as possible. So we really did talk to them and listen to them about their culture. This is going to give you the answer to one of our initial questions. Their culture is very young. It's very energetic. They deal with social media all the time. They are very entrepreneurial. Kate talked about that earlier, about what we're seeing. So as part of this, one of the things that most of the people within the organization seem to love to play, as Kate talked about, gaming, and both musical as well as games themselves. So they created a breakout area where that could really be highlighted, and this is right near the sort of crux of the overall workspace. It's not hidden off in a corner. So
drums in a workplace is a very interesting touch, by the way.
Yeah, the workspace is very open, very much allowing the light to come in, as Greg's student had noted, allowing light into the workspace as well as light into the spaces that are built over here on the right. As part of the corporate culture for this group, the ability to really show off what they do. One image I don't have is of their computer room and really how they highlight the computer and the technology that they use in a very, very cool sort of almost saying the same thing, gamification of it. But as you head to their boardroom, you actually have to go through their main sort of town commons. So that is part of their sort of culture, and they feel that it's important that everybody see that. They have these very, very large, this looks like student space to me, but it's not. This is the corporate work environment for them. Very, very large interactive collaborative spaces that they can use. And every time I've ever been in here, these walls are just full of ideas and projects that are going on. So the last thing we want to do is I'm going to have Kay walk through. If you've got your piece of paper, we're going
to see if you got our quiz right?
Yeah, see if we got the quiz right. Go ahead, Kay.
All right, so Lisa, I'm going to have you click to the first image, and we're going to say, is it corporate, is it a school, or a corporation? And the answer is, it's a library space at a school. All right, next. You want to advance? There we go. School or corporation? So this is at UCLA. It's the biomedical laboratory. It's one of their collaborative pods, and you could see this in any corporate environment today. It's very, very common. Okay, let's go to the next. School or corporation? And it's Duke University. So again, it's something that you could see in most workplaces today with the telepresence environment, but this is Duke University, one of their learning labs. Next, school or corporation. So this is a corporation, and you can see it looks very, very similar to the one that we were just looking at with the PRTN corporation, and it's set up. They probably have a little bit better technology at the school. What do you think? Probably, yeah. But, all right, next one, school or corporation. So this is a school. This is Victoria University. And again, this looks very, very similar to what you might see in a corporate environment or one of those scrum environments in a research and a development. But this really is indicative of students kind of that revolution, that team working, and learning how to be part of a unit. Next. School or corporation. This is a corporation. This is corporate offices. But you can see there's lots of social spaces, lots of meeting areas, etc. A little bit more formal than what you might see in some schools, but there tends to be a little bit of a convergence that we're seeing happening. And next, Lisa, school or corporation. And this is the one that you gave away. This is a corporation. But again, this looks like something that you could see in any kind of college common area that you might see where students are gathering to kind of get together. And so what's happening is a lot of people are trying to attract the best and brightest out of colleges. And so there's a lot of crossover and a lot of emulation, and they're learning from each other about what's working and what's not, really to get people active, engaged, and attracted to come work at certain places or come learn in certain places. Lisa, is that our last one? Nope, one more. School or corporation. And this is a school, and it looks very, very similar to a lot of corporate environments that we're seeing today. But again, it's all about that team learning, coming together places, giving people options and choices so that they can kind of control how they're going forward and how they're working. And I think that was the last one. Oh,
there's one more.
One more. Okay, here we go. School or corporation. So this is a corporation. You could probably tell by the age of the folks in the picture, but this is a corporation, and again, it's very, very similar to what you might be seeing in some college campuses today. So with that, I think our wrap-up is that we are more and more starting to see that the workplace is now supporting an easy transition for new graduates out of college, and colleges are starting to prepare students and really support knowledge workers that are coming back to the learning environment and academics. And it's becoming a seamless transition between the two as we see this convergence between academic settings and corporate America. And I think with that, we're going to open it up for some questions and answers.
Yes.
Is that it? Yep, thank you.
Yep, you have quite a few questions waiting for you. It says, we have a member of the audience, they've been in college teaching role in STEM. It says, can you comment about faculty and staff expectations? Also, he finds that the industry labs are generally well ahead of university ones.
Greg, do you want to talk about that and the expectations of the students and the faculty?
Well, you know, as I said, it's a really fluid environment, and it varies a lot class to class. You know, as I said, I teach a group of 20 students and I teach a group of 330 students. The 20 students are all within the major that I'm involved in. The 330 students are open to the entire university. And, you know, in that case, it's all very anonymous. But I've worked really hard to try to find ways to give them the opportunity to engage in a more personal way. So we have online teaching software that we use where I can post questions for them to respond to. I'm very quick to respond to email questions to try to keep it as personal as possible. But, you know, as I also said earlier, there's this big conflict between the cost of the education, you know, our real cost are faculty and facilities. So they're constantly, you know, looking for trying to teach more students with fewer full-time tenure track kind of people. If you look at the statistics on the merging there or the shifting there of the number of faculty that are truly full-time and this is their career and they're paid well to do it, those numbers have been dropping dramatically in the past 30 years or so. About, I don't know, probably 15 years ago now, we quit teaching math classes with teachers almost altogether. We have a space in an old shopping mall that has several hundred computer stations in there, and the students go in and take all their math classes self-taught. For a lot of students, that's fantastic. For a lot of students, they really struggle with that. So, you know, we're doing everything we can. We deliver a lot of good education, I think, here, but we do some things that perhaps were better in times past when we had more people. So you know, it's not anything unlike the challenges I'm sure the corporate world is facing. But so, you know, the expectations are widely variable based on the kind of class that's being taught.
Yeah, and I think the second part of that question was about the technology, and I think, you know, there are some universities that have really, really sophisticated technology, like research grants, et cetera, in there, and they have some amazing equipment that you may not necessarily find in the corporate world, and you can find the exact opposite in other places where you might have some corporations that have some amazing technology and universities that may not be. So really, it's kind of I don't think you can say that it's always better in one or the other. I think it's kind of a mixed bag.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. And someone's asking, how many students were in your survey?
There were, you know, I sent it out to probably 500 students, and, you know, students being students, I probably got about 50 responses. But
10%, that's about what we get in the corporate world too.
Yeah,
right?
but I've been teaching, you know, I've been teaching this large class for about 5 years and teaching altogether for about 25 years. And, you know, you see what's going on. I mean, the faculty kind of blend into the woodwork at a certain point, and, you know what's going on, and you see how they work. I think probably, you know, the thing that I talk to my students a lot about is they've got to figure out how to get their social media addictions under control. You know, I keep telling them that time is their most valuable thing that they have here, and they've got to think about how to use it wisely. Have fun, but make sure that, you know, you're not just kind of, you know, binging on Netflix or, you know, lots of back and forth on social media and so forth, because it ultimately doesn't help them be prepared to enter the workplace. So I'm not at all surprised by that comment from industry saying only about half the students coming out are really prepared to enter the workplace. And I think a part of it is just not sort of embracing their work habits or questioning their work habits.
Great, thank you. So can you share some examples where gamification is being applied in faculty management workplace design?
So, gamification, it's interesting. I think, first of all, it's creeped into all of our lives, and everybody seems to have kind of a reward system, right? So the Marriott and the Starbucks and the loyalty points and the reward systems. But I think in the corporate world, what we're starting to see more and more is as we're tracking metrics and people can see return on investment. I mean, literally, I sit in a construction trailer every day as we're building a massive project, and we kind of have our own little reward system, whereas if you can save the project, if you get $1,000, you get X. If you can save the project $5,000, you get Y. If you can save the project $10,000, and so it's just kind of a thing that we do to kind of entertain ourselves and to kind of remind ourselves there's a bigger picture here, and to kind of bring fun to it, right? To make sure that we're remembering that we're trying to have fun at the office, but there's some real value that we can bring to the office or to the work that we're doing if we can do it. It's about recognizing people. So you see more and more corporations are having recognition programs and reward programs and identifying people. And well-being is a huge one, right? So most companies now have some kind of a well-being program, and employees are being rewarded if they participate, if they get involved, if they sign up for a certain number of classes, if they can lose weight, because ultimately we're going to take this to the next level where insurance companies are starting to say, all right, we're going to start paying insurance. We're going to start paying insurance by your health. And so if we can start encouraging people to be healthier today, we can reap better rewards. So, Greg?
I agree. I do know of insurance companies that are rewarding if you have a fitness program within your organization where you're receiving significant discounts on your health insurance on an annual basis if you participate in them. I also, on the gamification, I have one client who recently was asked if they could figure out a way to use their security badges to pay for food in the cafeteria. And he started to do some research on it and came back to the same senior executive and said, well, why would we spend the time to make our security badges work when we all carry smartphones? Why are we going from a cash to a credit card to a security device? Why wouldn't we just go all the way to the smartphones? So that was a way to sort of simplify and actually to remove that credit card information from their security, corporate issued badges. There was a real concern about credit card and other financial individual information being tied to it, whereas if it's tied to the individual's cell phone, then it's their phone and it's their information and they have that control. It's not tying it to a corporate device.
And Greg, in colleges,
well,
grades are still the gamification, right?
Love
the reward.
When I started teaching this big lecture class, I tried something that has been pretty successful because I knew that, if you're in the corporate environment, you get to know the people that you're working around. Even if, you get together for large conferences, you might have a couple of hundred people, and you know most of them. In university, students kind of roll into a class out of, 300 students out of 25,000. And, they might have signed up for the class with one friend or, know a couple of people in there. But so with that in mind, I created a set of trading cards for the students that would give them extra credit if they got a full set of trading cards, so like baseball cards. So I would hand these things out at the end of each class period, and they would get lots of duplicates. And I said, you just need to trade with other people in the room. And about 2/3 of the way through the semester, they're all kind of desperately trying to get rid of their duplicates. And there end up being these multiple conversations out in the lobby after, and I tell them the first day, kind of at the end, to sort of make light of this. I said, I've given you guys a perfect opportunity to meet that person four rows down from you that you've got your eye on, and it's like, go up and trade a card with you. I said, if you send me I keep waiting for a wedding invitation at some point, and I told them I would go if they invited me. but so far that hasn't happened. But I knew that they would come in and they would sit there side by side all semester long, one sort of anonymous person in a room of 300, and never talk to anyone if I didn't give them a way to sort of engage with each other. So it's been...
It's nice to know that Virginia Tech has a dating service in the conference block with all the other benefits that they have as well. Good going, Greg. I like it.
It's been fun.
Thank you. We're getting some questions as far as the operations and maintenance side. So they really like the pictures, and they're wondering how well it stands the test of time as far as like 5 to 10 years. And with all the hard surfaces, how do you manage sound?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest challenges in the workplace today is not that there's too much sound. It's actually it's the opposite. There's almost too little sound. And if you think about it, people will complain about, oh, the office is too noisy. It's actually the opposite. If you can go to a Panera and work successfully, or a Starbucks, having a certain amount of background noise and hum makes it so that there's a certain amount of energy in the space. When you walk into a big space and it's totally dead quiet, that is just so, I don't want to say demoralizing, but there's no energy in the space. And it's clearly hearing people articulate something all the way across the room that's much more distracting than just kind of having this background noise and hum. So there is a balance, right, because you don't want it to be loud, but you do want to create a buzzy type of environment that has a little bit of energy in it and people want to belong to. And as far as the test of time goes, most of the spaces that we're designing today are meant to be very flexible and very agile. So we're moving things around. You don't have repetitive, somebody sitting in one chair for 8 hours a day. These spaces are designed to encourage movement. And one of the ways that we keep them fresh is, changing things up a little bit. So they're intended to morph and to move and not be these stagnant environments. And when you can move things around, you can kind of take some out of the high traffic areas and put some others in, see what works, see what doesn't, etc. So I don't think it presents any more challenges as far as maintenance goes. I think it's you kind of have to be a little adaptable. Lisa and Greg, you can weigh in on that as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, Kay, what I would add, especially to your first comments, is creating a variety of spaces for people to go to. So, for instance, I sit in an open workstation. I have all my career, but I needed a quiet place to do this call from today, and we have those. I'm in a small phone room, a glass front. Some friends just stopped by, and I waved to them, and those people are on the video, so probably saw me do that. But, it gives us a way to go to have some place where I can do a quiet call, I can have some quiet contemplative spaces, and to have the variety of those spaces versus, as Kay pointed out at the very beginning, the last thing that we're seeing right now is those rows and rows of cubes that are all exactly the same, and it gives nobody a choice of any place else to go for their 8 or 10 hours in the office besides that one cube where they sit down behind the monitor. The variety is really the key today to successful workplace, we find.
Yeah, I think in the university setting, it's maybe a good question because, I think there's a little bit, we got the money to build it, but then we forget about it because we don't have the money to necessarily refresh as often as it is done in the corporate environment because, the money's just not there, and I think the stuff gets used a little harder. There's not as much sense of ownership. This is my place of work, and my pay and everything else kind of is reflected in how successful the company is at managing their money. And I think I've kind of been watching that on our campuses. There's been a lot of changes in the last 5 or 6 years or so, and it's going to be interesting to see how the stuff wears over time.
Yeah. I think using the right thing in the right application. I recently had a client look at me and she said, I'm not going to get money to do this again for 10 years. And she picked up a fabric and she said, so how can we consider this? And I turned it over and I said, there were 200,000 double rubs on this piece of fabric. And she said, what does that mean? I said, you get 200,000 times of getting up and sitting down in this conference chair. And she goes, okay, then we can do that. It felt to her as much more residential in look and feel, but it really wasn't. It was engineered to be incredibly durable.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to squeeze in one last question before we wrap it up. It says, is it possible that trends in academic design result from more corporate designers working on academic projects?
Say the question again, Joshua, I'm sorry.
Sure. Is it possible that trends in the academic design are a result from more corporate designers working in on academic design projects?
So yes, actually, I think it is, but I think that has a part of the impact to it. But I do also believe that everybody is looking that the traditional classroom and that model is kind of out of date. It has probably been for some time, and that we need to start rethinking the way that we're designing those spaces. So I think that can have a small part of the factor to that, but I think the larger one is that the needs of students today and the way that we connect to people and the way that we connect to each other and the bridge between coming from a academic into a workforce has got to be a smoother transition, and I think that's what's really driving the change, probably more than you have corporate designers doing more academic work.
And actually, I would put it the other way around. The academic institutions that we work are going to the corporate designers because they want something different than what they've been getting. So we're being invited in because we have a strong workplace practice here.
Excellent. Well, the three of you did a great job. A lot of interesting questions. I want to thank everyone for coming to the FMCC webinar today, and have a great day. Oh, that's right. We do want to let everyone know that we have an upcoming webinar next month or later this month, and also the FMCC is having a meeting at World Workplace Wednesday morning, and we would encourage any of you going to World Workplace to attend that meeting as well. Next slide, please. And the FMCC does like to make you aware of all the other councils out there where you can go for information and other feedback. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.